In the beginning, there was only the infinite light, boundless, formless, beyond time, beyond space. In Qabalistic terms, this was called the endless or the all. It was pure being, without shape, without other, without even the notion of selfhood. There was nothing outside it because there was no outside yet. But within this infinite light arose a mysterious longing, not desire in the human sense of lack, but a movement born of fullness, a divine impulse to become known, a movement from unity towards multiplicity, from the hidden into the seen. And so the infinite performed a great act of contraction, a withdrawal, creating a hollow space within itself. This is called the sacred concealment. This allowed a finite world to come into being. Into this space flowed a ray of divine light, entering like a beam into the void. This light began to form vessels, structures, or containers through which the divine qualities could manifest. These vessels were the 10 emanations known as the Sefirot, things like wisdom, understanding, strength, and beauty, the archetypal forces of all that would come into being. But in that primordial world of pure potential, something went awry. The vessels, though radiant in concept, were too fragile, too rigid to contain the infinite power of the light. One by one, they shattered, unable to hold the fullness of the divine. This event is called the shattering of the vessels. And when the vessels broke, sparks of divine light, pieces of the infinite, fell and scattered through all levels of reality. They became embedded in matter, hidden in form, wrapped in layers of forgetfulness. This is the world in which we live, a world of beauty and brokenness, a world where the divine is not absent, but dispersed, waiting to be found, waiting to be remembered and restored. The great work of the mystic, the initiate, the magician, and the devotee is the work of restoration. The gathering of sparks, the healing of the broken, the return of the many to the one. Each moment of awareness, each act of compassion, each true word and sacred deed lifts the veil, frees the spark, and rebuilds the vessel. And so the myth of the shattered vessels is not just a story about the cosmos. It is the story of your own soul. You too are a vessel. You carry within you both light and the fracture, and your life is the path of restoration. Hello, and welcome to Embodying the Tree of Life, a living approach to the Qabalistic tree. Take this moment as a sacred pause. This video is split into 5 parts so that you may pause between if you need to. You may wish to stop after any one of these parts to reflect, journal, or simply rest, and return when you feel the spark rise again. There is no rush on the path of integration. What follows in this video and the rest, it's not meant to be consumed in one sitting, but rather to unfold over time in layers. So please take it all at your own pace and return as often as you need to, remembering that you alone are responsible for your spiritual path. I will be using the spiral method, where I approach each concept from various angles to help you see the holistic view of the tree and its aspects. In this first video, I want to offer a sort of orientation to what the Tree of Life actually is. Not as a belief system or religious thing, not as something to worship, and not as a ladder to climb, but as a symbolic map of how consciousness, meaning, and human experience organize themselves. This is not an initiation, and I will be making no claims of secret knowledge. In fact, all true deep spiritual knowledge is freely open and given and ready to be learned and integrated. It is just that it has a built-in mechanism for hiding itself from those who are not ready, not because anyone is behind, but rather because perception is the key that unlocks the next door. It is this perspective shift that we are seeking throughout this video and series, a lens that will help everything else in this series that follows make sense. The Tree of Life originates in Jewish mysticism and has also been received and adapted within Western Esoteric traditions. What is offered here is a symbolic, archetypal, experiential approach rather than religious dogma or instruction, and it is based on the Western Esoteric tradition. The Qabalistic Tree of Life is the blueprint of the universe's creation, the spiritual journey, and the structure of the soul itself. Beyond that, it is a fractal blueprint for everything, from the connection of ecosystems to the evolution of an argument between two people. This blueprint shows up in every aspect of life, from the smallest to the largest scale. The tree is the divine blueprint that shows how the universal consciousness manifests reality. It is meant to help us understand our deepest psychology as well as how we interact with divine forces. It contains energy centers, or Sefirot, as well as energy pathways between these centers. The tree is meant to help you explore and heal your mind and soul deeply, to connect to the divine both inwardly and outwardly, and to understand the structure of reality. One of the most common misunderstandings about the tree is the idea that it represents a hierarchy, something to climb or accomplish in order to become more spiritual, more evolved, or somehow above ordinary life. But the tree was never meant to be a ladder. It is more like a map or a blueprint. A map isn't meant to be conquered. It is filled with paths to follow at your leisure. A blueprint isn't meant to be rushed through. It is meant to be a guide for slow, stable building. It shows you where you are, how things relate, and what happens when movement becomes unbalanced. If someone looks at a map and immediately tries to jump to the destination without understanding the terrain, they get lost. The tree works the same way. So we will be walking the Sefirot and pathways of the tree slowly, once a month, giving time for integration in between. Because as I said earlier, there is no truly secret, hidden knowledge that harms, but rather rushing through things too quickly so that they are unable to be integrated, or jumping ahead before you are ready. That is where most spiritual seekers harm themselves, not through the information itself, but through rush, timing, or an unbalanced approach. The Tree of Life describes how intention becomes thought, and how those thoughts become feeling, and feeling become action, and how action returns to meaning. In traditional language, this movement of creation is sometimes shown as the lightning flash. You may have seen that in the image, the descending current of energy that unfolds the tree from potential into form, not as an ascent, but as manifestation. So whether or not you study the tree, you are already living within these patterns, just as someone who lives in a house, they may not understand its architecture, but they're still living in it. It is thought that only 5% of our thoughts, actions, emotions come from our consciousness, whereas 95% comes from our subconscious or unconscious. This tree blueprint gives us the space to connect and work with these hidden depths of our own minds, therefore gaining more understanding and autonomy over the subconscious conditioning that may be pulling us away from the fullness of living. At the top of the tree is the sphere or energy center or Sephira called Keter, often translated as crown. At the base is Malkut or Malkuth, often translated as kingdom. These are often described as spirit, matter, heaven and earth, but that framing can be misleading. The deeper teaching is not separation, it is emanation. Keter is not somewhere else. It is already present in Malkut or kingdom. And Malkut is not something to escape. It is where the tree experiences omniscience. For how can the divine experience everything if it excludes the experience of finiteness? It must experience this to experience all possibility of its own emanations. So let us expand on this a little further so that we can keep shaking out deep-seated ideas of hierarchy, since it is so deeply programmed from birth into our psyches. One way to understand the tree of life is through the difference between ordinary camera film and holographic film. If you cut a strip of camera film into pieces, each piece shows only a fragment of the image. So if you have a piece of film and it shows like a mountain, and I were to cut it into quarters, you would only get a quarter of the mountain, right? But holographic film works differently. You can cut it into hundreds or thousands of pieces, and each piece would still contain the whole image. The tree works the same way. Each sephira contains the pattern of the entire tree. Each part of our psyche contains the whole, expressed in a particular way. When we focus on developing one part of ourselves in isolation, so for example, focusing on Keter while ignoring Malkut, for example, this can become insight without embodiment. It can become love without boundaries. It can become discipline without compassion. And this is where imbalance can easily appear. Insight without grounding can lead to dissociation, and loving without structure can dissolve the self. Willpower without empathy can become cruelty. The tree doesn't respond to striving, it responds to integration. You don't climb it like a ladder, you inhabit it like a body. And just a side note, that in blueprint terms, Keter of one tree or psychological aspect is actually Malkut of the next one. So even if one attains deep integration of Keter, crown, heaven, you'll find that that revelation is just the groundwork or the beginning of the next unfolding. And this is why focusing on just a single sephira, a single experience, or a single insight while neglecting the rest of the self can be destabilizing, not because the insight is wrong, but because the whole has been forgotten. This is where many people may hyper-focus on the symptoms when the tree is calling you to tend to the roots or foundation. The tree of life does not describe perfection. It describes relationship. Relationship between expansion and contraction, between thought and feeling, between desire and restraint. The Sufi mystic Rumi says, your grief for what you've lost lifts a mirror up to where you were bravely working. Expecting the worst, you look, and instead, here's the joyful face you've been wanting to see. Your hand opens and closes, opens and closes. If it were always a fist or always stretched open, you would be paralyzed. Your deepest presence is in every small contracting and expanding. The two is beautifully balanced and coordinated as bird wings. Every psychological struggle, every relational conflict, every inner contradiction can be understood as a breakdown in relationship between these forces. And the symptoms, the pain, the confusion in life, the loneliness, These are all arrows from the blueprint trying to focus your attention on what needs repair in order to achieve balance. If you are interested in holographic theory, Michael Talbot discusses it in his book, The Holographic Universe. In it, he talks about how all things are deeply connected because everything is a different manifestation of the same underlying information. And our brains act as a receiver. And if you're familiar with the work of Dr. Donald Hoffman on consciousness, this may also sound familiar as well. He posits, after doing many experiments, that perhaps consciousness itself does not reside in the body, but rather the brain is like a radio tuned into the frequency of consciousness. Dr. Donald Hoffman proposes that our reality is closer to a user interface shaped for survival, not for seeing true reality. He argues that seeing true reality would hinder survival, leading to our highly filtered experience. The holographic nature of reality reflects the tree's deepest secret, that each part contains the whole. The divine is not reached by escape, but by descent into presence. Malkut holds Keter as the seed holds the tree, not separate, but already whole. Thus, every contraction, every fracture, every moment is not apart from the divine, but a holographic echo of its fullness, waiting to be realized. Now, in esoteric Qabalah, the Tree of Life blueprint contains 3 layers, like 3 maps overlaying each other in order to paint a full 3-dimensional picture. Besides the Tree of Life itself with its Sefirot and its pathways, Hebrew letters serve as code or creation spoken into existence. They are not just sounds or vibrations, but are almost like divine wires connecting across the pathways. The letters are seen as the language or technology the divine uses to create the blueprint itself. They transmit divine consciousness from one energy center to the next. And we'll talk more about those in a second. The third symbolic language map is one that you may already be familiar with if you're on this channel, which is the tarot. In this work, tarot is not approached as a fortune-telling system, nor as a tool of prediction. It is approached as a symbolic alphabet of human experience that overlays the pathways of the tree. It represents the archetypal way the psyche and perhaps consciousness itself speaks in image and pattern. Tarot in this context does not tell you what will happen. It shows you how meaning moves. However, understanding these patterns will help you see how things move so much more clearly, which can often be so extraordinarily accurate that it may be seen as psychic or divinatory. Just as the Sefirot describes centers of expression and the Hebrew letters describe pathways of movement, the major arcana of the tarot describes archetypal states of awareness. They are not better or worse stages. They are conditions of experience. In this series, tarot is used as a language that overlays the tree, helping us feel and recognize patterns that are otherwise very difficult to name. Many people first encounter tarot through what's called the Fool's Journey, a story that begins with the Fool and moves through the major arcana until it reaches the world. This story is helpful, but it is also incomplete if taken literally. It suggests a linear progression, a climb from innocence to completion. But the Tree of Life is not linear. I just wanted to point this out because when the tarot is overlaid on the tree, the Fool is associated with Keter, crown, and the world with Malkut, or kingdom. This may seem backwards, since the Fool is 0, or the beginning of the major arcana, and the world is 22 or completion. But this only seems like an inverse if you are viewing the tree as hierarchical or thinking that there is a certain goal to reach. However, this isn't a mistake, but rather it asks only for a change in perspective. The Fool represents unconditioned awareness, consciousness before identity, before form, before experience. This is not naivety, it is potential. That belongs at the level of Keter, not because it is higher, but because it is unmanifest. The world, on the other hand, Malkuth, represents integration, the ability to live wholeness within form, within the physical manifestation we find ourselves in. It is not transcendence beyond life, it is presence inside life. And that belongs in Malkuth, the kingdom, because Malkuth is where the entire tree becomes real in this dimension, in this present reality. The Fool is not the beginning because of it's naive, and the world is not the end because it is final. They are reflections of the same truth, seen from different sides of experience. Like a prism shining different colors from the same piece of glass. From the tree's perspective, the Fool does not climb upward to become the world. The Fool descends into the world. So we dissolve hierarchies and see the tree as a holistic system. For example, when the world, Malkuth, is fully lived, when embodiment, meaning, and presence align, the Fool is revealed again, and Malkuth becomes Keter. This is not a ladder, it is a circle experienced through time. It isn't backwards, it's non-linear. So if you're thinking of the tree as a blueprint, then you may see experience or growth as a line of trees connected together. The Keter of one tree is the Malkuth of the next tree. So in that way, it is a reminder that the journey never ends, but rather deepens. This shift is important because it prevents a common misunderstanding in spiritual work. The idea that the goal is to escape the world. In the tree of life, the goal is not to leave Malkuth behind. The goal is to inhabit it fully while you're here. And by doing so, we give the divine the experience it has created us for. Tarot, when placed correctly within the tree, reminds us that wisdom is not proven by how high we go, but by how deeply we can live. Not how seriously or how stringent to dogma we can live, but how engaged we can live in all aspects of ourselves. The tree is the structure, tarot is the image language, the Hebrew letters are the motion and articulation. If the Sefirot or energy centers describe centers of experience and tarot images describe states of awareness, the Hebrew letters describe movement. They are not static symbols, they are verbs. Each letter describes a way in which energy, meaning, and consciousness travel between states, between Sefirot. On the tree of life, each of the 22 pathways is associated with a Hebrew letter. This doesn't mean the letter belongs to the path in a rigid way. It means the letter expresses how that path moves, the quality of transition, tension, or transformation that occurs there. These letters are not meant to be memorized or mastered all at once. In fact, learning them too quickly often disconnects them from the lived experience we are seeking. In this series, they will be introduced gradually, just like everything else, only where they illuminate what's already happening. The path itself is meant to be slow, integrative experience, which is why I'm releasing them so slowly. And I hope that you will work through each section for a little while before moving to the next. But As always, you take full responsibility for your spiritual work, so do what feels right for you. So as I mentioned earlier, at the most general level, you can think of this work as 3 overlapping maps of the same inner reality. The tree shows structure, where experience gathers. The tarot shows image, how experience feels and appears. The letters show movement, how experience changes. None of these maps are complete on their own, but together they describe a living process rather than a static system. It's tempting to rank these languages, to think one is more advanced or more sacred, but they are just different ways of speaking about the same thing. Structure, image, and movement, body, psyche, and process, all arising together. One of the central symbolic stories associated with the tree is known as the shattering of the vessels, which I shared at the beginning of this video. It is a key to understanding the origin of imperfection in a world created by a perfect source. Symbolically, this describes what happens when an intensity of energy, awareness, or meaning pours into structures that are not yet able to hold it. This is not a story about failure, it is a story about timing. We see this when someone is given responsibility before they're ready for it. You may have heard the saying of a manager or boss rising to the level of their own incompetence. This would be an example of a vessel, the manager, being given more responsibility or energy than they can handle, and therefore they collapse or shatter under the pressure. This happens when power arrives without maturity or slow, discerning integration. This also happens when deep insight comes faster than the nervous system can integrate it. Psychologically, shattering happens when growth outpaces embodiment. In a way, this can also be seen with the rise of technology. We often integrate technology into our lives well before we understand its impact on us, or even before we have evaluated how it can be utilized ethically. Now, the shattering of the vessel stories explains imperfection in a creation made by a perfect creator. Alan Watts actually expanded upon this idea in one of his lectures. He spoke about how to be omniscient, God or the universal consciousness must have finite, imperfect experiences as well, or this divine being wouldn't be omniscient. This harkens back to the story of the shattered vessels. When vessels shatter, fragments remain. In the language of the tree, these fragments later become what we call shadow or distortion. Shadow is not evil. It is energy that has lost its container. It is a distortion of the Sefirot or pathways, not a separate thing. For example, love without containment becomes obsession. Discipline without warmth becomes rigidity. Vision without grounding becomes fantasy. Most harm in esoteric work does not come from the depth, the information. It comes from rushing. The tree does not ask us to climb, it asks us to stabilize. If something here doesn't make sense, that's not a problem. Often it simply hasn't had time to settle. The tree of life does not point away from life, it points directly into it. Work, relationships, creativity, grief, rest, these are not distractions from spiritual understanding. They are where the tree is embodied in your life. If a teaching cannot be lived in how we speak, choose, rest, and relate, it has not yet become wisdom. Wisdom is practical and not just theoretical. It is meant to be lived. As you walk through the day, simply notice where the sacred sparks hide in the ordinary. A glint of kindness, a forgotten grief, a moment of stillness. You are not seeking answers. You are gathering fragments. Let whatever has stirred within you remain with you, not to be solved, but to be lived. In the next video, we'll explore light and shadow together, why they cannot be separated, and why fear arises when imbalance is misunderstood. There is no need to move ahead quickly. Take some time, rewatch this as many times as you need to, and reflect as long as you need. Let this settle and integrate. You will know when you are ready to move forward. So here's what the series is going to consist of. This orientation video, as well as a few more explaining the shadow part of the tree. And we'll also have a video on practical application. Then we're going to move through all 10 Sefirot, one at a time, so that we can truly get into it, deeply into it. And then we're going to move through all 22 pathways between Sefirot before having a few concluding videos to kind of close out the circle and cycle. I'll be releasing one video a month, something like that. Take a moment now to notice how this lands in your body and mind. Don't analyze it or try to resolve it. And as we come to the closing of this exploration, take a moment to return fully to your body. Feel it where it is. Notice the weight of being here now. There is nothing you need to understand fully today. Whatever has landed will unfold in its own time. Carry forward only what feels nourishing. The rest can remain here. When you are ready, gently return to your day. Go in peace, beloved, and return whenever the Spirit calls.